All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. And I'm happy to welcome today psychologist Alan Godwin, who's the author of a new book, Ties That Blind, Unraveling Stories That Keep Us in the Dark. Alan Godwin, great to see you.
Well, it's very good to be with you this morning.
We're going to delve into things like why do people believe lies, and more interestingly, collectively, as a society, we can sometimes be fooled. But tell me, just for starters, why'd you write the book?
To back up a little bit, I've been practicing as a psychologist in Nashville, Tennessee for 35 years. And I think anybody in my field, after you practice for a while, you kind of find yourself in a lane, and you tend to develop some expertise in that lane. And the lane I found myself in over the years, not purposely necessarily, but I had a lot of people come into my office who had been in real manipulative kind of relationships, and they had been burned. And this may be a family member, it may be a close friend. In some cases, it was somebody in a ministry, who is like they're a wolf in shepherd's clothing, And so they came into my office distressed about that, but a lot of times they wouldn't necessarily know why they were distressed. And as we backed up a little bit and tried to understand the source of their emotional upheaval, it was what I was discovering was it was in the context of one of those manipulative relationships, which I've come to use the word drama to describe those relationships. We all talk about drama queens and drama kings, but I think there's in a more technical sense, we can use the word drama, because the way the drama works is if I'm a manipulator, my role in the drama is this, your role in the drama is that. And as long as you stay inside of your drama obligation with me, we will have a good relationship. So relational success is contingent upon drama participation. But what I was finding is the longer you stay on the drama, the more it takes its toll on you. So people come in really feeling kind of crazy. They're not crazy, but they feel crazy, and they just feel very discombobulated. So in the early 2000s, I realized I was writing about that so much that I ended up writing a book, the first book that came out in 2008, which really talked about that subject, how you get sucked into these drama relationships and how you can extricate yourself from them. And the question that would present itself in my office a lot of times was, how could I have been so blind? Why did I not see it before? How did I get hoodwinked the way that I did? And about 10 years ago, so I still deal with that all the time. About 10 years ago, I noticed something a little bit different was happening, and that is there was a collective version of that drama arrangement, and people were getting sucked into these collectively deceptive systems and become so wrapped up in it. And so the questions that were presenting themselves in my office had not so much how did that happen to me, but the questions kind of became like, how did that happen to Uncle Irving? I just don't get it. He's always been this paragon of common sense and clear thinking, and he just believes the craziest things, the most conspiratorial things. And the second part of that question is, I don't understand what's happened to him personally, because he's always been very committed to certain kind of morals and principles. And it seems like he's just willing to jettison all of those principles and adopt the collective immoralities of this group that he's attached himself to. So I spent about 5 years thinking about that and about 5 years writing about that. And so the culmination of that is this recent book that's come out. So my desire has been to try to understand and explain as best I'm able to. And I'm not sure anybody explains this thoroughly. But how does that happen? How do people get wrapped up in these collectively deceptive systems? But then the more important question is, can people get out of those systems? Is there any way to help someone extricate themselves if that's what they want to do?
Yeah.
So so that's my shot
I
at.
love it. So you write the propagation of a false story begins by telling people what they want to hear and then appealing to their coalitional instincts. Are those the two? Is that the two fundamental ingredients for how, if you were to manipulate, build a cult movement or something, you would have those two things?
I think I think there's other things besides just that, but I think those are two very central things. And the title of the book is ties that blind. So people they have such a desire to be attached. We all have what social scientists have referred to as the coalitional instinct. You want to have connections with people who are like-minded. So there's a gravitational pull of human nature to pull you into groupings where we think alike. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing, but there can be bad versions of that. And so people can get pulled into those situations where the warm embrace of crowd inclusion ultimately overrides what's true. And so what's true becomes less valuable to them than the connections they have inside that group. So I think that's people who are cult leaders, demagogues, authoritarian leaders. They historically, you can look at many books that have been written about that. They find ways to ascertain what it is that people want to believe. And if we can find out what they want to believe and tell them that it's true, and you can congregate with other people who believe the true story, that's a magnet, very powerful relational magnet that pulls people into these arrangements.
Do you think that manipulators, authoritarians, cult leaders, do they know this intuitively, or have they studied? Are they following a playbook, or is this just something that for some reason they grasp by nature?
I think that's a very good question. And I think a lot of people ask that question. And I have to be honest in saying that I don't know that I know completely the answer to that question. I think there are people who know precisely what they're doing. And it's a playbook. I mean, sometimes that's referred to as the authoritarian playbook. And but it's not like a manual. They pull out and study and say, okay, today I'm going to do step 3. But it's a playbook in the sense that it does seem to follow the same course with a lot of people. So I think there's some that they know what they're doing. They're consciously manipulative. I also think though that there are people who have come to believe their own story, their own alteration of reality to such an extent that they actually believe it's true. And it's likely that if you hook them up to a polygraph, they would pass the polygraph because they actually believe their own alteration of reality. And that's why they can seem so convincing when they're telling you it's true, because they actually believe
Yeah.
it themselves.
I mean, I think it's important to study this concept in the abstract, but just, the more we talk about this, the more Donald Trump is the elephant in the room to me. I think he does believe he won the 2020 election. He probably
Yeah.
didn't originally believe it. Now he probably does. You could hook him up to a lie detector and he would probably pass it.
Yeah.
And
There's
then
an
when you
old saying of that's my story and I'm sticking with it.
were right.
And I think there's a lot of people that somewhere internally they have made a deal with themselves to say, that's the story I'm going to adopt, and I'm going to take that story with me to the grave. And I will never, ever, under any circumstances, relinquish that story. And so at some point, or maybe at some series of points, they've bought into the story to such an extent that now that becomes their reality.
Mm-hmm. And then what you were saying earlier too really hits home about, I mean, I think so many of us have friends and family who grew up teaching us values, what, maybe it's about charity, maybe it's about race, maybe it's about, Christian values. You get on the list, and then they're now supporting a political movement that is doing the opposite of everything that these people stood for and told us about. What happened to them? Why is it that this cognitive dissonance is happening? Why were they susceptible? And then finally, how do we deprogram them?
Well, the first question is easier than the second one, but uh, there are a term that I use in the book. As far as I know, this is original with me. I don't know if anybody else has used it. They probably have, but I call it the story-based fortress. And the reason I picked that term is that's in contradistinction to a term used by Jonathan Rauch, the Brookings Institute scholar and author and journalist. He calls it the reality-based community.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certain ways that we determine what's true and what's not. And good examples of people in the reality-based community would be scientists and journalists. They have certain tests that information has to pass in order to be included in what Rauch calls the constitution of knowledge. This is what constitutes what we call reality and knowledge. And so the thing that's important to people in the reality-based community is what's true. And they welcome debunking attempts. Because if somebody tries to debunk what's in there and they're able to do it, that's actually good news, because now you can say that that knowledge does not belong in that body of information. So, and there's what he calls epistemic humility. What we don't, we're humble about what we know, and there's always this sense that maybe something will come along at some other time and disprove what we believe, but that's actually good news, because we want to know that, because truth acquisition is our primary goal. But the story-based fortress is different in that the goal is not so much acquisition of truth, it's reinforcement of the story. And so the story is the story that people want to believe. And so they look for information to reinforce the story. And so it's called motivated reasoning. They will look for information to confirm what they already believe.
Mm-hmm.
And Matt, the thing that's interesting is a lot
Why do
of
they
what
really believe? I'm sorry to interrupt you,
that's okay.
but I'm just so curious. Why, like, if you spent your whole life telling your kids that charity is good and that helping, that we're all created in the image of God, and don't you really believe that?
Well, again, good question. I think a lot of it has to do with the nature of a story-based fortress. I call it a fortress because the fortress walls protect us from malign outsiders who want to destroy us. And so it's very much of an us versus them arrangement. And whenever you set up an us versus them arrangement, it's very easy to adopt a battlefield morality. And what happens in a battlefield morality is we're going to suspend the normal ways that we do things because we are at war.
Yep.
And if we don't adopt battlefield techniques, we will be destroyed. So we'll get back to our morals later.
Yep.
And
That's key.
Right now, what's more important is that we win the battle. And so under that framework, it's easy to, it's a short step to jettison everything that you always held as moral and say it is, but right now that's not the most important thing. We've got to keep ourselves from being defeated.
Totally.
We'll get to the morals later.
I think that is key. I totally agree with you. And I saw this happening on the right 10, 15 years ago. I do think that the first step is to say that this isn't politics as usual. You have to fight fire with fire. And this is actually tantamount to a real war, not just a struggle between people who happen to disagree over tax rates or something like that.
Right. And then it's easy to say what we need to win this war is a warrior who will lay aside, who's not going to be constrained by the normal conventional things that constrain us. We need a warrior who is willing to put first things first and to give us the victory that we need, because if we don't do that, we're toast. It's an existential battle.
Yeah. Yep. Apocalyptic, and Mitt Romney wasn't tough enough to do what needed to be done. Therefore, we have to go with this thrice married casino magnate,
Right.
Vulgarian. How important do you think Fox News is to all of this? Because it's, in order to construct this story fortress, I would imagine that there needs to be, that this is a process where people are slowly acculturated to it.
I think Fox they probably started out very well intentioned.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And they started out, I think their slogan all along has been fair and balanced. So their idea was, what you're going to hear in the news is something that comes primarily from the left side of the spectrum. So we're going to try to provide a balance to that. And a lot of the people that they had as commentators and as news people, I think, really bought into that and believed that. And I think they were probably sincere in their desire. I used to be a Fox News junkie. I mean, I watched a lot of it, and eventually it started driving my wife crazy. So we started finding some other things to watch at night. But what I did notice is, as time went on, is they left the fair and balance out, and they started presenting only one view, and it was a cohesive view. It was all of the pieces of information that they talked about fit together like a Jenga tower, and it adopted that us versus them kind of framework that said, we will tell you the truth. What those people out there will tell you is not the truth. It's all lies. So if you want an accurate take of what's going on, listen to us. And, I think there's been enough people within the Fox world who still have had integrity. And so in some cases, people further out to the right than Fox have kind of taken their place in some situations.
You tell two stories in the book. One is sort of a micro story about a real life individual who was deceived in a close personal relationship.
Yeah.
The other is your own story growing up in collective deception. And I'd love for you to talk about both of those.
Yeah. The first one is a real life person and who attests to the accuracy of every detail in the book. So this is not a contrived story. This is not a composite story of various people. This is an actual real life person. The second story, the premise of the book is, if you can understand how it happens individually, you can understand how it happens collectively, because the elements are essentially the same. So I wanted to tell a story about how that happens. Somebody that gets wrapped up in that collectively deceptive system. And what I chose to do is, rather than telling it from the lofty perch of an academic or a professional clinician, I thought, let me tell that story from the ground, because that happened to me. And I grew up in the collectively deceptive demagogic system of Jim Crow in Mississippi. That's where I grew up. So I'm old enough. I was born in 1952, so I don't remember the civil rights notable events in the 1950s, but I do remember them in the 60s. And I was old enough to watch TV and ask all the questions about what was happening during those years. And in hindsight, I look back and I can see that was my world. It's the old saying, a fish doesn't know it's wet, it doesn't know it's in water. So I was swimming in the waters of racism, but didn't have the awareness at that time to understand that was the case.
Yeah, it's just normal. It's just how it is. It's how the world is, right?
Yeah, I normalized the abnormal and justified that which can't be justified, because that's just what you do. That was my world. Everybody I knew was part of that world. Everybody I was connected to, everybody I was related to. So, um, but as time went by, I, I guess what I would say is I didn't know it at the time, but I think I could look back and say I was a light follower. And as time went by, I started seeing discrepancies between what I knew was right and what I had grown up with. And I was bothered by the discrepancy. And sometimes people can see the discrepancy and they numb themselves so they stop being bothered by it. And I think what happened to me, I was bothered by it, didn't know what to do with it, but I had a discomfort about supporting things that increasingly as time went by, I just knew they weren't right.
I'm a little surprised that we got where we got with Trumpism so fast because, I feel like, we'll call it the liberal media if you want, but I was just showing my son the other day, there's an episode of The Twilight Zone. I think it's Dennis Hopper is in it, but it's a young man who is being pulled into fascism and Nazism in America, like in the 1950s, 60s. And just, any normal person who would watch that episode would be inculcated with values that are anti-fascist. I mean that not, no reference to the Antifa movement, but just anti-fascist. There were great movies like, I don't know if you've ever seen the Oxbow Incident.
I did.
Which is a really good Western. Like so many of these movies that stressed liberal values. I don't mean progressive or democratic values. I mean like liberal democracy values that we grew up watching. And so I would have thought that that more Americans, by virtue of the amount of time we spend watching TV, would have been more deeply wedded to those values than apparently were.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention the Twilight Zone because I talk about that in the book. That the individual, I tell her story, and she said, growing up in my family was like being in the Twilight Zone. And so she said sometimes I expected to see Rod Serling step out of the show. And another movie that I refer to in the book too is a movie called Ordinary People. It was Mary Tyler Moore.
Okay.
She had always been sitcom queen up to that point, and this was her first dramatic role. And the movie was directed by Robert Redford, and he won the Academy Award for Best Director, and the movie won the Academy Award for Best Picture. And it was a fabulous movie, but it tells that that story. It was a false story. And the kid in the movie had discomfort with the false story, but paid a price for not buying into the story, and how he eventually emerged out of that. I teach a class, and I tell the students, whatever you do, watch that movie.
I would have thought that those movies would have, again, by exposure, would have made us immune to these calls.
Well, and I tell you another movie, which it's on my top 5 list of favorite movies, is Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. With Jimmy Stewart.
Came out
in 1939. And what you see is the very thing that we're talking about, that how people got wrapped up in this collective system that justified what couldn't be justified in light of winning the battle that needed to be won. And he saw it and was bothered by it, and they tried to destroy him. Now, the movie has a wonderful ending. I wish life had that wonderful ending, but it really is good. We watch it every single 4th of July.
Well, your book does have an optimistic ending, so let's try to end here on a somewhat optimistic note. Cheer us up. How do you get us out of here?
Well, having grown up in Jim Crow, Mississippi, and having over time, when I say I emerged out of it, we're talking about a decades-long journey. So there was not some afternoon where suddenly the lights came on and I saw the error of my ways. It was a gradually emerging epiphany for me. But I've developed a great appreciation for the Black church, because going through centuries of slavery and Jim Crow, somehow they had to maintain their commitment to a larger set of principles when everything around them was fighting the other direction. And they adopted a commitment to this thing called delayed justice. We believe in justice, but it's also delayed, and we're not sure exactly when it's coming, but we're not going to give up our hope that it's coming. So it may appear to a lot of us that we look around and say, when is this ever going to change? We're not seeing this happen anytime soon, and it may not happen anytime soon. But I think we can learn a lot from the Black church to realize we're going to hold on to justice no matter how long it's delayed.
Amen.
And I think there are people who can emerge out of the false stories, but that it usually doesn't happen because we sit down with them and try to give them the reasons why they shouldn't be there. But what may open their eyes like nothing else is if we become the slivers of light in the darkness, that may give them something to follow, and they may be intrigued by it. And there will be some people who take the other fork in the road and go further into the cave. But I think there are some people who, if we're not buying into the false story, it means something to them because it's relational. And ties blind us, but ties can also open our eyes. And so I try to end with that note in the book. It's not necessarily something that gives immediate relief, but I think it's a long-term perspective that we need to hold on to.
Check out this book. It's called Ties That Blind: Unraveling Stories That Keep Us in the Dark. Dr. Alan Godwin, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me.